Hey everybody, it's Greg Rice, and we're here in Johnston, Rhode Island, and we're at Pannone Lopes Devereaux in O'Gara. And we're with a very special guest today, Mr. AARON Weisman. AARON, how are you?
I'm well, Greg. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being with me. And before we get going, I want to say thank you and a nice shout out to our good friend, our mutual friend, John La Rochelle, for introducing us. John gave me the introduction to AARON. And John, I want to thank you so much. And if the folks at home don't know about John, he is a criminal defense attorney, and he also practices family law. He's in downtown Providence at the Turk's Head building, so you may want to check him out. So
that would be a great recommendation. Nobody better, in my opinion.
He's a solid guy. So John, thank you very much. And AARON, I kind of wanted to give the general public here a little overview of your career. Okay,
sure,
because
great.
You've been on the private side, or excuse me, the public side for a long time, and now you're private. And I wanted you to kind of have the floor to be able to talk and tell us a little bit about your career.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you, Greg, for the opportunity. I was on the public side for a while. I began my public venture actually on June 17th, 1991. I remember that date well. Prior to that, I was doing appellate work for a boutique law firm in Providence, headed by Lauren Jones at Jones Associates. And it was through actually a mutual friend of ours, who has now passed, that I met the person within the Attorney General's office at that time. Jim O'Neill was the Attorney General of Rhode Island. That was in the late 80s, early 90s. And I was hired in 91 in the appellate unit, the criminal appeals unit. And thus began my fulfilling career in public service and working on the criminal prosecution side, or some people would refer to it as the persecution side, but of course we always, I think we always tried to do justice, and I think we would temper whatever prosecution we had with compassion in the appropriate cases for the defendant. I went on to serve under 6 attorneys general.
Wow.
And we really had some great memories, and I think we did some great things. Me and my colleagues at the Attorney General's office, in what we would usually do is uphold criminal convictions. People would they would be tried. People on I call them on the front lines of criminal justice, the trial courts. There would be convictions, fortunately, in my opinion, and those convictions would be appealed to the Rhode Island Supreme Court, and then we would step in usually and try to get those convictions affirmed by our state high court.
And then after that was?
So I did that basically vast majority of my career from 91 through 2018, and then I was nominated by President Trump to be the United States Attorney for Rhode Island.
Wow.
And I thank our local senators, our senior senator, Senator Reed, and Senator Whitehouse for their assistance in that. And I took the position beginning of 2019 as United States Attorney. So I basically moved across the river, downtown Providence, across the street from the Turk's Head building,
Yep.
where our friend John is.
Mm-hmm.
And we led a really wonderful office there of also really experienced and talented and conscientious prosecutors with prosecuting violations of federal criminal law. And the office, of course, also did a great deal of civil work. They represented the United States when the United States was sued. They collected debts, forfeitures, and fines, and other matters. And I really enjoyed my time at the United States Attorney's Office. I met some really outstanding individuals with whom I remain close.
And there's 93 districts, right, that the country is divided into?
That's right. So Rhode Island is one of the, I would add one of the smaller ones.
Yep.
Many states have more than one district.
Yep.
Some large states have up to 4. And some of the districts are actually enormous in terms of the resources. The U.S. Attorney's Office had, I think, about 27 assistant United States attorneys. So we have about
in Rhode Island.
In Rhode Island, right? But many districts have hundreds of assistant United States attorneys doing all that important work.
Now, a question I have, and maybe you can't answer it, but how do you determine, or does the office determine, what type of cases they're going to prosecute? Because if you look on the press releases, the majority of them are related to children, drugs, financial crimes, things of that nature. And then there's, cyber crimes that get some action and other things lower on the totem pole. how does that kind of list, if you will, get populated? How do you choose is my question.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, right? Because actually, so the cases come in through the various agencies. So the U.S. Attorney's Office works with, for example, the DEA, the FBI,
Gotcha.
primarily, works with ATF, and it works with various other federal agencies. It could be in housing, it could be the Amtrak police, it could
IRS.
be IRS, that's right, they do tax cases, exactly. So when there are violations of federal law come to the agency's attention, there are agents within those agencies. For example, the FBI, the so-called special agents, and they work the case, and they come in and they work alongside often the assistant United States attorneys in the investigation of those cases. That's one respect in which the federal prosecution differs from the state prosecution, at least in Rhode Island, where the prosecution at the state level, the packages sort of come in sort of wrapped
Gotcha.
and tidy, and they say, here,
Yeah.
Mrs.
Yep.
Assistant Attorney General, here's our case, please prosecute it. At the federal level, there's more cooperation in the investigation of
Gotcha.
the cases that ultimately result in the prosecution or don't result.
So it's harder, you're
It's
saying.
more. There's more involvement in the investigation of the offenses
Gotcha.
in the federal level. But in terms of, what percentage, I mean, I think it varies with the crimes, varies with the times. I mean, there's been I think if you would sort of take a 20,000-foot view of sort of the federal offenses, and it would vary by where you are in the country, right? For example, right,
Okay.
if you are in some parts of the country, you see a lot more immigration cases, right? Other parts of the country, you could see other types of cases. But I could speak for the District of Rhode Island, I think, is we've seen a big uptick in what we call the fraud cases, the scamming cases, whether the use of wires or the mail. Tremendous amount of opportunities technology has provided for unscrupulous individuals. Maybe they're misguided or they think they want to make a little bit of money, or
Right.
maybe they'll make a lot of money. And they essentially steal people's money through computers, through scams, the type of phone calls you get from Social Security or IRS. So we saw a lot of that. That's a big part of the criminal docket in federal court. We also saw a lot of, unfortunately, the proliferation of child pornography. And of course, the state has laws with respect to that. But the sentences tended to be much harsher in the federal system. So the worst cases, for that reason, would come over to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Gotcha.
And those cases would be dealt with appropriately.
Wow.
And then, of course, you have the gun cases,
Mm-hmm.
the guns and drugs are large scale. Of course, the state does an excellent job at that as well. But in certain respects, sometimes, if it's an ATF case, for example, or another federal agency, sometimes those cases would migrate over to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
So for the folks at home, right, can you give us a simple example or delineation between the Rhode Island Attorney General's office and the U.S. Attorney's Office and what the difference is? And maybe give an example.
Sure. Well,
One case that would go there and one case that would go there.
So that's a good overview question. I mean, so interestingly, in Rhode Island, the previous U.S. attorney, Peter Nerone, is now the Attorney General. And prior to being the U.S. attorney, he was an assistant United States attorney. And prior to that, he was in the Attorney General's office. So I'll just preface it by saying there's
Really
exactly
tight.
we're all tight, and I think it's important to be tight because you need to see the prosecution as a joint mission, not a competitive business.
Yep.
But you take a look at where this offense might most appropriately be prosecuted. But obviously, we look at this broad idea of federalism. Like I like to think of the United States of America as having 51 different jurisdictions. We have the 50 states, and we have the United States of America. And each of those sovereign entities has their own laws. So, for example, in Rhode Island, they have a book of laws. The United States has a book of laws. You can commit a crime that's a violation of Rhode Island law, you commit a crime that's a violation of federal law, and it could be both. And you would have to decide, often it's not fair to prosecute a person in both federal and state court. Sometimes it is. But there'd be cooperation between whether you violated a state law or you violated a federal law.
Thinking about the media, do they help or do they hurt your cause?
Well, I think it also varies. I mean, I would say in Rhode Island, by and large, there's been a healthy relationship.
It seems it.
It seems, so yeah. But I mean, in terms of, and I'm speaking more from the criminal prosecution point. I think the media does a pretty good job, maybe even a very good job of fairly presenting the issues.
Agreed.
In the criminal matter.
And how about as far as types of cases go? Which are the hardest cases to prosecute and why?
Well, of course, in the state side, and this is one of the stark differences between the federal and state prosecution. On the state side, you saw really horrific crimes, right? Murder, rape, robbery, crimes which you see much less often. Mm-hmm. Like there's no, like if there's a murder committed in Rhode Island, it's prosecuted on the state side, right?
Gotcha.
I mean, it's very rarely would be a federal offense, committed in a federal building or something of that nature. So the most horrific crimes, by and large, are prosecuted in the state courts by the Attorney General's office. Mm-hmm. And those are very difficult cases for the families, for the victims.
Gotcha.
Sexual assault crimes, very difficult, of course, for the victims, very difficult for the families. There's a lot of emotion, understandably, there's a lot of trauma. And one thing that the Attorney General's office does very, very well is they have a very large victim, we call it a victim witness unit, and staffed by people who are very engaged and very sensitive and attendant to all the issues that surround individuals who have been victimized by crime. And they do everything that they can, whether it's getting some funds to those people or helping pay for funerals, mm-hmm. or just being with them throughout the trial. And that's enormously hard work. And the people that do that are to be commended. There's also a victim advocate in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she does a great job as well. But again, in terms of the most horrific cases, by and large, those cases are in the state court. Sometimes the most gratifying part of the job that we did was seeing a successful prosecution through at the end, and the victims knowing that justice had been achieved, getting philosophical views about what criminal justice is, and then you get into issues of when you're dealing with those types of offenses, the most horrific types of offenses, and whether capital punishment, in the rarest of the rare, would be more appropriate. Those are all issues. In the federal system, though, people go to prison for various amounts of time depending on the type of crimes that they commit. And there's a lot of compassion which is shown to criminal defendants.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of compassion, which is, I think, a good thing. I think it's a good thing overall because, again, depending, dealing with crimes that are not violent, we're talking about crimes that we spoke about earlier, and not child pornography. So we're talking about a lot of fraud cases, those types of, or maybe cases involving guns and drugs, but the individuals who commit them tend to be young.
Gotcha.
And maybe they didn't have a lot of advantages in life, and maybe they saw it as, a way to make some money. So there's some compassion that's shown to them, and there's chances that are given them. I think that's a good thing. Sometimes you could turn a young person's life around by engaging with them and perhaps not sending them to prison for 5 or 10 years.
I volunteer rather at the ACI, and I teach job readiness to the offenders. We don't call them inmates anymore, we call them offenders. The goal and the role of me is to say, hey, here's some skills that you can employ within yourself to create a career and kind of stay on the straight and narrow. So we do it concurrently with their sentence expiring so that they're kind of excited to get out and also giving me that excitement via their attention. So it's time kind of...
So how do you find that works with them? I mean, is that...
it's
success
still
depends on the individual.
It's still too early. I would say maybe after 3, 4, 5 years, I'd have a good thumb on it and some data to look at, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But overall, I feel like they were just given bad data.
Who's the they?
The offenders.
The offenders.
Growing up. So, like you said, they saw maybe drugs as a means to an end and a way to pay the bills or a way to pay for food.
And they didn't have good guidance in life. They didn't have any of the advantages
Correct.
that many of us have had.
Correct.
Maybe a parent or another person that could steer them.
Or a book or education.
And thank you for this book, by the way.
You're welcome.
But that's right, or education. And they could be impulsive, and some of them may have had trauma in their young lives.
Correct.
Which have created the situation.
So that's the good that I try to do is contribute there. And I think they enjoy it because I'm not, just a regular old person coming in there telling them they did wrong. I'm just kind of a fresh look at it, I would say.
That's right. I think there are more resources today. I know when I started
Yeah.
back in the early 90s, there were fewer resources. And today there's much more attention paid to saying maybe we can make a difference in this person's life. Because the last thing we want to do is see the person get out and reoffend.
Right.
Bad for the society, bad for the offender.
Absolutely. And now here you're at, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet. Try not to look. Pannone Lopes Devereaux and O'Gara.
You're good.
I got it. So I got my cheat sheet here. What are you doing now? And how does it feel to be, I guess, maybe on the other side of the coin?
Well, I don't do a whole lot of criminal law, although I'd be willing to.
You're not opposed.
I'm not opposed to representing those who have been charged with offenses. The firm represents a very wide variety of clients. Business clients, municipalities. We represent a lot of employers. So the firm does a lot of employment law. The firm does a lot of trust and estate work. The firm does a lot of work with many corporations that have a need for transactions in the healthcare field, in the education field. The firm has about 30 lawyers in an office in Boca Raton, Florida, which is very active. The partners here are very experienced. They've been around for a while. They've seen a lot of things, and they get results for the clients. So I'll make a plug for the good work that my partners and I do here out in the private sector, which is really try to solve the issues that their clients have in the most cost-efficient way. Because a lot of times, there are disputes. It could be a transaction, a business that went sour, a partnership that went south, and often litigation is not the answer. You can also mediate the dispute. You can try to come to terms, and I think the partners of the firm do a really good job of just trying to resolve a dispute in the most cost-efficient way.
What's kind of the biggest flaw you see? You haven't been on this side for long in clients that would maybe improve their situation, that you just think in your head like, if he or she just looked at it or did this, it would be better for them. Like, what's kind of their biggest speed bump to their own success?
Well, very often in the business and the partnership world, there's sometimes there's an optimism that goes into a business. You don't foresee ahead that maybe I'm going to have a falling out in this relationship. And by the way, it could be the firm does a lot of work with, as I mentioned, trust and estates too. It could be not putting things down in paper. You think everything's going to work out, and if you could have just written down at the very beginning, I guess is what they tell couples who are getting married. Maybe write it down, right? Put down everything looks like it's going to be great, but you never know. So if you could just even just a couple of lines about what the expectations are, what the agreement is, you'd be surprised at some of the pitfalls you can avoid if things don't work out.
I think I spoke to a gentleman here by the name of Cass DiCarvalho.
Oh, yeah. He's a great example of that. Yes.
I spoke to Cass maybe a few weeks ago about a possible venture that I was considering, not real estate, something different in the entertainment, music business type of thing. And I said, what should I do? What's the most important thing I should take from our conversation? He said exactly just that. Have some type of operating agreement, some type of contract, something in writing that you can refer back to. Because you feel good now, you're excited now, but if it, tanks.
You'd be surprised. Exactly right. You take a look at a case, you look at it, it's like, what a blank show. You're like, oh my gosh. You're like, if they could have written down just 2 lines, $50,000 of litigation later could have been avoided.
Right.
Because, of course, there's a lot of, we're humans. Sometimes people have egos, and then they start pointing fingers. And sometimes expectations can be unreasonable, I always like to say, and I saw this on the criminal side a lot of disputes. I tell the kids growing up, there are 3 sides to every story, right? There's your side and the other person's side, and the truth often lies somewhere in the middle. But if you can put that truth down in paper, the earlier, the better.
And how about your whole career? What's the biggest lesson that you've taken or learned from all of your cases, all of your experiences?
Wow, that's a pretty heady question. I might have to give that one some thought, but just off the top of my head, I think if you could put your ego aside and try to get along with people, practice the golden rule, maybe put yourself in the position of the other person. Very often we look at somebody and we're quick to judge them. But maybe if we were in that situation, we won't be so quick to judge ourselves.
Mm.
And some of the finest people I know, I always like to tell some of the young people, I say, those people are very hard on themselves and they're easy on other people. So they will look at somebody and say, oh, look at that person. I can't believe they did that. What the heck were they thinking? But those extraordinary people would say, well, you have to understand. Look at where they came from. Look at the situation they're in. But on themselves, they'd be very strict on themselves. So sometimes you could avoid a lot of life's problems by just sort of empathizing with the people, right? Empathizing. There's a book that's in our White House put together, proverbs and lessons, and one theme that goes through it is just that, about not really judging people too harshly, but empathizing with them, looking at the situation that they're in, and maybe seeing things from their perspective. Of course, as friends, you can always improve people. We talk about one of the issues, the big issue that we've seen around the country in the last 20 years has been sort of the hopelessness of a lot of young people, right? And the drug use, which is a symptom of that.
Yeah.
Not a cause, but a symptom.
For sure.
Of that. And not having a purpose or a meaning in life. As friends, if people care about each other, see somebody that's doing things to themselves, sometimes it takes strength to say, hey, dude, what are you doing? What are you doing to yourself? And it sort of goes into one of the arguments against, the Rhode Island General Assembly recently passed, and the governor recently signed a law allowing safe houses, essentially, for people to shoot up and whatnot, and without getting into the politics, whether you agree or disagree. But one argument that some advocates have made is that I've seen many people that have said to me, if I hadn't gotten arrested, I wouldn't be alive today. I know people like that. And there's something to be said for a friend, kind of shaking them out and caring for one another. So we sort of have the empathy, but also empathy sometimes means trying to save somebody else.
Right. What do you think of today's youth compared to your life growing up?
Well, I was a bit of an idiot when I was young. So
you were an idiot. I find that hard to believe.
I was a complete idiot. I can say that. Complete idiot. But so that's another reason I can't be hard, because I remember one time somebody said that I was looking at some young person and somebody's like, what are you talking about? Look at you look at what you were like when you, and so that's exactly right. So I'm not one to say, but I don't know. There's something about being young. You see this whole movement of retired people that live in college towns. Have you seen that?
No.
Yeah, like people retire to college towns, little towns in Vermont,
interesting,
or place around the country, because they want to be around. There's something vibrant and life-giving about the young and their sort of sense of the future and what it holds and excitement. You want to be sort of surround yourself with that, and that's what's so. Sometimes.
So you're telling me maybe some folks are going to retire to Huxley Avenue in Providence?
I'm not sure that would be. I'm talking more maybe about these little quaint towns in Vermont, or New Hampshire.
Gotcha.
But yeah, there are communities.
Gotcha.
Where like Main Street communities, and there's books, and even in Providence, I'll tell you. I take advantage of sometimes what Brown University has to offer. Some of the free, people come to speak. Somebody might interest me, a speaker. I'll come in and I'll sort of sneak in and sit in the back. Or, it's open to the public.
Yeah.
And I'll hear what they have to say. That's another thing that I talk about, sort of the dialogue. I think it's important to have open discussions about issues. And sometimes on campuses that's not the same as it was back in the day.
Right. Yeah, speaking of Brown in that area, I was up there last week with my wife, and Conan O'Brien just happened to walk by. You know him from Late Night with Conan?
Yeah. Pretty cool. He's got a kid there?
I don't know. I would say yes. He's probably not just walking around
Thayer Street.
Unless he's one of these folks, maybe he's retiring to a youthful community like you're saying. But I gave him a wave, because I'm not like the bombard. He probably gets that enough, like the fame, oh my God, take my picture. So I just gave him a little wave. He gave me a wave back, and it was just like a cool little moment that's only in Rhode Island.
I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's like, it's so knit, so tight, it's so cool.
I was walking down Manhattan not too long ago, and I bumped into Andrew Yang. He was nice. He had this guy walking around with him. I did a little selfie with him. I thought it was very nice.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure you're busy, man. We'll wrap it up here. If folks want to get in touch with you or the office, how should they do so?
Well, they should call Pannone Lopes in Johnston.
Awesome. Any email that you'd like to utilize or prefer a phone call?
You can do an email as well at aweisman@pldolaw.com.
And that's one S in Weisman.
Correct. A. Weisman. AWEISMAN.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Greg.
Nice to meet
It was
you.
a pleasure.
And if you have any questions for me, I don't know why you would, but post them in the comments section below. I'll get right back to you. Once again, Greg Rice here in Johnston, Rhode Island.